be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of, What If Issei, Rias Meet Doom. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Sir Yeetus Deletus on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. 5,000 years ago, the world had gone to SHT. From the farthest reaches of the earth and beyond, the gates to the Shadow Realm opened, and the army of Armageddon passed through, raging like a storm. Tiamat had only been a few hundred years old then, but that was still old enough for her to know what a monster the real world was. It was full of greed and treachery, and she thought she'd seen the worst. Oh, how cruel reality had been. They were rage. Brutal. Without mercy. Demons. Even now, the names of the Dark Ones left a horrendous taste on Tiamat's tongue and conjured burning memories she desired to forget. These weren't those fakes or imitations that beings were labeled out of fear, these were real. And they were horrifying. They came and swept through the land like hellfire, their sole purpose to inflict as much suffering unto their victims as possible. Like a swarm of locusts they came by the millions, crashing down on the innocent like tidal waves, sparing none from the onslaught. Their bodies were torment and chaos given form, and the magic they wielded was agony. There was no defense against it, only inevitable torture. The body and soul were torn apart, the flesh tenderized and corrupted beyond ascension, the soul painfully warped and processed into nothing more than raw chaotic energy, suffering perpetual agony. To die by their claws was damnation of the highest order, for those who fell to their wrath became demons themselves. And they never stopped. Even with their entrails hanging from their sides, their limbs shredded to bloody pieces, they roared in loathing, slaughtering as many as they could until they fell apart at the seams. Their rage was endless, as was their capacity to destroy. They were truly evil given form. The world never stood a chance against them. In 4 months, what seemed like the blink of an eye, they took everything. The once gorgeous grasslands, forests, deserts, and mountains of earth had become smoldering wastelands of charred blackstone and magmatic spires. The air had been poisoned, the land terraformed to suit the insidious needs of the Hellkin. Entire dimensions had already been absorbed, massive pantheons and factions cast into the mouth of hell, never to be seen again, their people likely becoming nothing more than enforcers of hell's will. What remained of civilization was desperate. For the first time in eons, the factions and pantheons, or what remained of them at least, banded together for the sake of mutual survival. Dragons, devils, angels, and even gods, the most arrogant of beings, stood side by side to stare death in the face. Such a spectacle was unheard of and would have been a magnificent sight to behold had anyone given enough of a SHT about things such as politics or social standing to care. At the time, nobody did. All focus was on surviving long enough to see the light of dawn once more. All day. Every day. But even then, it soon became clear that survival was hopeless. At best they slowed the demons down, but even then, with each day and night that passed, outpost after outpost fell, the news of such losses demoralizing those who remained. Entire legions of organized resistance fighters were wiped, only to be corrupted upon death, bent to hell's will like puppets. With each friend that she lost, Tiamat felt herself crumbling, her mind clouded by fear, anger, and a dulled sense of pessimism and cynicism. Her core had been gouged out, and a seed of doubt had been sown in, taking its place in her heart, in everyone's hearts. With each pained breath she took, she fed the seed with her fear, and from the cursed nut sprouted veins and tendrils of despair that entangled her limbs and entrapped her soul. Darker the clouds above her head grew, and in time those vines sought to drag her into the abyss. After struggling for what seemed like an eternity, the resistance had been thinned to the last few thousands of beings. Only the strongest managed to survive, a couple hundred from each sentient race and only a handful of gods to boot. Hope no longer had meaning, and survival was doomed to fail. Cut off from one another, the last few circles of life in the known universe had nowhere left to run. Tiamat was one among them. Her body had been battered and bloodied to near death, her scales melting from her hide and her wings torn to shreds. The pain was immense and everlasting, and as she gazed at her rapidly falling comrades, she shuddered, fear overtaking the void that had filled her quaking soul. This is the end, was the collective thought of everyone left. As if to punctuate the end of their world, to ensure that nothing was left, a harbinger arrived. From the darkest depths of the 9 circles came a titan, a world-eater, the icon of sin. Its mere existence was wrong, an inverse to what should and shouldn't be, and those who lay their eyes upon its awesome form were driven to madness. With its presence alone, it warped reality, damaging the intricate order of the universe, jeopardizing all of creation. The very moment that its hooves touched the earth, the very idea of hope had been banished from the world. The beast of Armageddon flared its aura of torment, and every last remaining soul in the universe began to sink. Tiamat didn't even have the strength to gasp, let alone breath, as the metaphorical vines and tendrils tightened, constricting her soul, blackening it with dark energies. She felt herself slipping away, the wave of corruption entangling her, pulling her down, changing her. For a moment, she could see their world, and in an instant she broke as she was assaulted. Pain, suffering, and torment was absolute. Fear was the only emotion. Damnation was upon her. But, in the final moments, when nearly all life in the universe ceased to exist, he came. With his blazing arsenal of adamantine strength, the doomslayer cut through the beasts of the 9 circles like a sickle through a field, his fury far surpassing their own, his thirst for retribution unquenched. He moved quickly, graceful as a butterfly, his speed and finesse unparalleled by any of his demonic foes, but his fists struck with barbarous brutality, showcasing his celestial might. He crushed his adversaries with vigor, the power he possessed shining brighter than a star, the ethereal light illuminating the shadows that had swallowed the world. His heart laced with cold but disciplined fury, the doomslayer faced the icon of sin. 2 titans met, and the legendary battle that followed shook the very foundations of reality. Blows that transformed the land were traded, mountains toppled, islands were sunken, but though the icon of sin threatened to consume all of creation, the great Slayer's strength and will surpassed all else. The Slayer struck the icon down, and the World-Eater's hold on this plane faltered. The tendrils of darkness that constricted the souls of many were destroyed, the hearts of the free now basking in the ethereal light. As the tide of demons receded, Tiamat felt tears of gratitude prick at her eyes. She had nearly turned and would have been damned for eternity, forced to relive that pain over and over again. She never wanted to feel that again, and luckily she wouldn't need to. The battle finally over, the war for survival at its end, Tiamat felt something brewing within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The Slayer came down to her incapacitated form, and he pulled her and many others away to safety. During that time, Tiamat made a decision that would change her fate forever. Without his knowledge, and perhaps rather selfishly, Tiamat fulfilled one half of a lifelong familiar contract, binding her soul to his. She did not care if it seemed presumptuous, nor that they had only just met. The warmth that had filled her being when he freed her from the shackles of damnation was something she had never felt before, it was undoubtable. Despite her nature as a dragon, despite the quickness of the whole situation, she felt protection and familiarity in his presence. She was not sure why, and she didn't care either. If she could be with him, she knew that happiness would follow. But before she could ask him, plead with him to do the same, to allow her to stay by his side, he left, following the demons through their fiery gates directly into the heart of hell. The warmth and comfort she felt by his side, the aura of protection and familiarity she had grown fond of, however brief it may have been, suddenly disappeared, and back came the aching cold of loneliness and vulnerability, amplified by the lingering effects of the dark essence. Not for the first time in the past few months, Tiamat wept. With the invasion having met its end, the last few thousand beings in the universe united under one banner for a little while longer. Nobody forgot about the Slayer or his impossible presence. Many came to worship him, even in the presence of other gods. Said gods didn't argue. Over the next 2,000 years, sentient life would spend time recovering and repopulating. The Slayer's memory gradually faded, but that was a given. There had only been a few thousand people left when he had saved the world, and that many people can only spread his name so far before it was lost in the sea of millions that came with newer generations, especially since the Slayer himself was nowhere to be found. With so few people to even remember the events of the invasion, unrest grew between the many races as some questioned why they were united under one banner. The arrogance and greed that came with sentient life was resurfacing. Tiamat was angered by the idea that nobody knew of the hero's name, that they would tarnish the unity that he had brought to this world. She didn't act on it though. She was too tired, and the scars of the invasion, both mental and physical, had not yet faded. Instead, she focused on getting stronger, elevating her skills to heights strong enough to rival gods and Satan-class devils. Over time, she slowly integrated back into society and lived as she pleased, trying to find peace within herself. Soon she was granted the title of Chaos Karma Dragon, the strongest of the 5 Dragon Kings, a testament to her strength and strong work. Eventually the different races and pantheons separated into their separate groups once more, effectively ending world peace. Although the Slayer's name was forgotten, his influence still spread throughout the universe, and would continue to do so in perpetuity. Another 1,000 years passed, the factions growing restless and uneasy as tensions grew between them. Tiamat cared none for their squabbling, and would have liked to ignore the political spectrum if possible. What happened next, however, changed her mind and the world as everyone knew it. What followed several thousand years of peace would ignite the Great War. Only a little over 2,000 years ago, powerful artifacts of stellar might rained down from the cosmos, appearing from a short bend in space and time. These artifacts, which granted earth-shattering strength to the users, would come to be known as the Relics of Doom. Tiamat knew why. She could feel the Slayer's presence on them, his power and influence flowing within them. The Relics of Doom came in many odd forms and numbered more than 50. Some came in the form of what seemed like children's toys or collectibles, said to be able to summon astral projections representing the powerful aberrations of hell itself. Others came in the form of small cards called cheat codes, granting the users unbelievable powers. One of the most rare types of the Relics of Doom came in the form of large batteries, said to be able to power entire civilizations for generations untold. The Relics of Doom were the straws that broke the camel's back, and with their timely arrival, the Great War between all peoples broke out. Entire civilizations rose and fell in the blink of an eye just for putting their hands on a powerful relic. Others who learned how to control the powers became unstoppable, leading nations and societies with irrefutable authority. Battles were fought, blood was spilt, and the power-hungry only grew ever more powerful. Tiamat was disheartened to find that the Doomslayer continued to remain absent from this world despite what she assumed to be his possessions showing up. She knew that he was in a perpetual battle with the forces of hell and thus would remain absent for possibly all eternity. She also knew that, even with the circumstances surrounding it, time moved differently in hell. Her heart grew cold at the idea that the Slayer had been attacked, possibly defeated, and was now lost, tumbling through space and time. She tried not to think about it and instead focused on the war. She took no sides in battle, but with luck she managed to snag one of the relics, the Doomslayer collectible. She was overjoyed to have obtained what was essentially a homage to her hero, even if the relic didn't seem to do anything. With it, many sleepless nights became rejuvenating, the subtle aura of her MSTR bringing her comfort. It was the greatest gift the universe could have given her. She cherished it. That was, until that bstrd Drake borrowed it from her to fight Albion. Tiamat was angry, no, absolutely livid when she realized her relic was missing. Worse, Drake had figured out how to activate it before she did. At that point Tiamat cared less about what the artifact did and more about the fact that Drake had basically stolen her prized possession, used its sacred powers without her permission, then lost it in battle. For the next few decades, Tiamat went on a BLD-fueled rampage, her dragon rage giving her the power to clash with both Drake and Albion at the same time. In an agreement with the many factions of the Great War, who had grown sick and wary of the battle between heavenly dragons, Tiamat managed to beat said dragons down with assistance from all sides before the biblical god sealed them within their respective sacred gears, boosted gear and divine dividing. After that, Tiamat lost interest in the war and went back to sleep in her cave for the next century or so. After the war ended, Tiamat moved from Earth to the underworld after making a contract with the devils. She had owed Ajuka Beelzebub a favor she didn't care to remember, and in accordance to their agreement, she would oversee any and all raiding games, also known as the arena fighting devils did for entertainment. For the next 1,000 years, life had been quiet. Tiamat had made some friends in devil society, and lived as she pleased, indulging herself. To an extent. None of the pleasures she experienced gave her the same feelings as the Slayer had though. Recently there have been larger political movements and no doubt a nefarious plot brewing up somewhere in the background, but otherwise, things were stale. Throughout all that time, Tiamat had lost hope that she would ever see her hero again. Though she had never voiced it in the past, Tiamat had grown depressed when the Slayer left 5,000 years ago. She had been filled with guilt knowing that the Slayer had saved the world, saved the universe, but didn't even get so much as a thank you for it. He had put himself between the innocent and the evil, suffering perpetual torment so that nobody else had to. She thought she would never get to pay him back for what he did for her, for them. Imagine her surprise when the Doomslayer himself appeared in the middle of her cave. No message, no warning, nothing. Just a brief flash and boom. She couldn't believe it. For the great Slayer to suddenly appear, this was her chance. Her chance to make things right, to thank him for what he'd done for the world and for her. This was her chance to show her eternal gratitude. It was far too unbecoming of her, but like a needy child hurrying to their parents for mindless physical affection, Tiamat rushed at the Doomslayer, subconsciously transforming into her NDE human form. She crashed into him like a meteor, wrapping all her limbs around him and bathing in the familiar aura he gave off. For the first time in a long while, she gave a happy sigh. She knew it was unlikely that her MSTR would remember her at all, but it still hurt slightly when the Slayer gave her that cold, questioning look. Regardless, she was still happy. After 5,000 years, the one that had saved her finally returned. After a couple moments of one-sided conversation with her MSTR, Tiamat soon found that the Slayer actually knew little to nothing about this world. Of course, she would be glad to explain everything to him if it meant spending more time by his side. However, an opportunity to tie loose ends arose. Now fully clothed in a blue skirt produced from magic, Tiamat sat with one knee crossed over the other on a large couch across from the Slayer, who preferred to stand. They were in the furthest reaches of her cave, where she actually lived in a fully furnished cavern, complete with wooden floors, ceiling lights, a full kitchen with an island, a couch in front of the island, a television, a massive bed that could accommodate her true form, and a door that led to a bathroom with magically sustained indoor plumbing. As the Slayer eyed her cavernous living room intelligently, surprised by the civility of Tiamat's living conditions, Tiamat took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. Now that the time had finally come, her nerves were flaring. 5,000 years lead up to this moment. She would not falter. MSTR, she started timidly. DMN, where was this anxiety coming from? She may have been excited by the Slayer's presence, but she was a dragon, not a schoolgirl. The Slayer turned his head towards her, his opaque visor boring into her. Anger rose within her. She would not let her nerves get to her now of all times. Her eyes closed, her fists clenched, and she steeled herself. When her eyes reopened, her face set into a neutral stare, and she met the Slayer's gaze with electric blue eyes. First things first, allow me to formally introduce myself to you. I am Tiamat, the Chaos Karma Dragon, and one of the 5 Dragon Kings, but don't worry about those titles for now. The Slayer didn't move, prompting Tiamat to continue. Let me get straight to the point. I would like to stay by your side. Please make a contract with me. The Slayer gave her a perplexed look. Allow me to explain. A familiar contract is, if I were to become your familiar, I would be magically bound to you for life. I would perform tasks for you, do as you ask, and in return you let me stay by your side and we work together towards our goals. However, you would hold the reins. She raised a hand palm up, as if raising a point. You would be able to hear my thoughts if you would like. You would also be able to summon me at any time, anywhere. Our souls would be bound, she explained. On top of that, nothing bad could possibly come of it for you. As your familiar I wouldn't be able to go against your order, nor would I have the ability to intrude on your privacy should you forbid it. You would also be able to end the contract at any time. But I trust that you wouldn't abuse this power. There was a PRGN pause, and for a moment the dragon and the Slayer stared at one another. Then, the Slayer turned his head, gesturing in a way that seemed to ask, why? Tiamat blinked at that. She took a moment to think before replying, MSTR, or should I say, Doomslayer. I am aware that you have no idea who I am, and thus, I have no right to label you as my MSTR. I can only hope that by the end of this conversation, I will be able to do so. Be warned though, I haven't much to say. She sighed, looking for the right words to say. To you, I'm nobody more than a strange girl you met just a moment ago. But to me, you are, well, a hero. You are the light that shines through the darkness of my world. The dragon paused to gauge his reaction. He didn't move an inch. Ever since I was young, I had always been lonely. Born from the latent draconic energies of this world, I never truly understood emotions that well, and a feeling of emptiness followed me wherever I went. I put up a facade of innocence, and for the first few hundred years of my life, I lived in a poor state of being. I witnessed the greed and the darkness within the hearts of many, some had even come to me feigning kindness and respect in order to use my power. It was terrible. She paused, gauging the Slayer's reaction. He gave a slow nod for her to continue. The only time I had ever truly found companions to call my own was in times of desperation. She swallowed, recalling the past. When the demons invaded 5 millennia ago, I found allies out of necessity, but rather than laughing and playing with them, I was running and fighting alongside them. Though they were good allies, friends even, the time I had with them was short, they were taken, consumed by the invaders. Tiamat didn't notice the Slayer's fists balling slightly at that. Over time, my emptiness became a depression as fear and melancholy fell over me, my newfound companions falling one by one. Eventually, we were driven into a corner, and only a few of us remained. I thought I was to meet my bitter end there, she sighed, remembering the faces of a few who had been struck down. But then, you came. The thoughts dissipated as she turned her head to the Slayers, a soft smile adorning her lips. I won't bore you with a pitiable sob story any longer. Let me spare you the details and just tell you how I felt. She rubbed a thumb across her fingers. You saved me, saved the world from the demons and felled the icon of sin. You brought hope when there was none. And, that's not all. When you carried me to safety, I felt something from you. Something I'd never once felt before in my long life. It was warm and comforting, just being near you. Your aura filled me with a feeling of protection and familiarity, as if you were a long-lost relative or the father I never had. After centuries of nothing but darkness in my life, you came and lit up my world like no other. I just knew from then on that, if I had the chance to stay by your side, it would grant me the happiness I'd never felt before. She looked down as she considered the Slayer's own situation. I also wanted to thank you. You saved me, us, no, every living being in this universe from eternal damnation. You saved all of us and didn't get so much as a thank you for your work. Someone of your caliber, who is willing to sacrifice himself to evil incarnate to save everyone else, to bring justice where there is no light, you're a hero to many, Doomslayer. To be by your side would be the greatest honor. So please, I am aware of how selfish it may seem, but allow me to be your familiar. Let me stay by your side. I promise to do whatever you ask. If it is taking care of me that worries you, you needn't worry. If it is my strength that holds you back, let me prove to you that I can strike down any of your foes. I haven't sat idly by for the past few millennia, I'll have you know. I can even act as a guide for you, help you on your travels throughout this world. Please, give me a chance. Let me be granted the honor to call you Mstr. With bated breath, Tiamat waited for the Slayer to reply, to do something, anything. Instead, he just stood there staring at her for what felt like hours. When the silence became almost uncomfortable, the Slayer suddenly moved. In a few steps, the man stood before her, his visor the incarnation of judgment. Tiamat stared back resolutely. Another minute passed, then, almost imperceptibly, the Slayer nodded. Tiamat was overjoyed. She let out a small but shaky breath, a smile coming to her face. Thank you, Mstr, she said softly. I promise. You won't regret this. She paused for a second. She was the Chaos Karma Dragon, not a fragile little girl. But maybe, this once. Just this once. Tiamat made a split-second decision, and she wrapped her arms around the Slayer in a tight hug. The Slayer only raised his arms in surprise as the blue-haired bombshell lay her cheek flat against the Praetor's suit. His fists balled in slight annoyance, but he didn't glare or push her away this time. After a few moments of silent one-sided hugging, the Slayer made the admittedly split-second decision to finally reciprocate by giving her a soft pat on the head. Tiamat smiled but didn't pull away. Silence reigned as one side enjoyed the attention and the other side remained awkward, yet indifferent. Eventually, the occurrence lasted 1 second too long, and in a bout of annoyance, the Slayer pushed the dragon away. Tiamat had the gall to at least look sheepish. Let's get this contract done. Please wait a moment. The Slayer did exactly that, his arms at his sides as Tiamat went to work. After a few moments of a much more comfortable silence, the ritual was prepared. When I say the word, please pour your aura into this circle, she said, holding her hand out. A magic circle was slowly spinning on her fingertips. The Slayer gave another nod and stepped forward. Now. As the contract was completed, the Slayer closed his eyes and felt a rush of information invade his mental faculties. He didn't fight it, allowing the knowledge to settle. Information about the Hell invasion from 5 millennia ago, the different races and factions, gods, angels, fallen angels, and devils. In a way, this way of gathering information was very advantageous. Had Tiamat tried to explain the difference between devils and demons to him verbally, he might have gone on AF crusade. While these different races were by no means perfect, some were pretty terrible in fact, they were by no means demons. That being said, the Slayer felt his inherent rage rise as information about the grievances and atrocities this world had committed came to the forefront of his mind. Corrupt politicians, warmongers, mass forced servitude of the innocent, mass RPE, mass genocide, criminal organizations, terrorist organizations, the sheer disdain and condescension that the supernatural treated humans with, the SDSM of the magical world in general, the greed and perversion conjured by evil. His fists closed strong enough to pop all of his knuckles at once, the sound rebounding off the walls of the Tiamat's room. After a moment, he loosened up, the rage settling. He would do what was necessary to crush those F-airs, but from now on, one thing at a time. As the information kept coming, the Slayer opened his eyes to see what was essentially his #1 fan smiling at him. He was fine with it. It showed that his efforts weren't in vain, and that he'd made a difference in the lives of some. It was nice to know that he was appreciated. Tiamat really wanted him to trust her, he could tell. Especially with the near overload of information he was receiving about her, her age, her full name, her titles, her experiences, her feelings and emotions, the essentials of her life story flowed right into his head. There were a lot of interesting stories in there, but none of Tiamat's words or thoughts were lies, nor were there any double meanings. In less than a minute, the Slayer knew as much as a close friend would know about her. In the end, he came to a conclusion. She was strong, and trustworthy. The Slayer thought back to Tiamat's story, connecting them to some of the memories he was receiving. The dragon had said what she meant, about that feeling of emptiness within her. As cold and distant as the Slayer may seem, he could empathize. After Daisy had been taken from him, his soul had become a void filled with nothing but his rage for the demons, and even after defeating them, that rage was still there. When he had found himself among the Night Sentinels, they became his brothers in arms, true compatriots with bonds forged in the heat of battle. Every one of them would eventually fall to the claws of the demons, only further fueling his rage. At least, in the end, their lives were taken for the greater good of everything. Now that hell was finally gone, however, he could finally find companions once more without running the risk of losing them in his crusade. Perhaps having such companions, especially ones that he could empathize with, could even help him find peace within himself somehow. Unlikely, but it would be nice. That being said, Tiamat was somebody the Slayer could have around. Not only could he empathize with her, she was familiar to him, being descended from the dragons of Argenta. He wondered if that's why he felt familiar to her. All dragons on Argent Nur seemed to have an innate sense that told them that he was their king. More so, he knew enough about her to determine that she could be trusted and was strong enough to take care of herself. She seemed to have a longing for physical affection that she herself was not aware of. Even if she wasn't aware of it, the Slayer could understand to an extent. Once upon a time, ages before this universe even existed, there had been a simpler time when the great Slayer of Argenta legend had been nothing more than a violent, gold-hearted space marine that enjoyed cuddling with his pet rabbit. How was it? Tiamat asked suddenly. She raised a knowing brow. Transferring information this way is much better than doing it verbally, don't you agree? The Slayer nodded. I'm glad. So, what now? The Slayer tilted his helmet inquisitively again. Tiamat crossed her arms. While this is technically my home, I am not opposed to abandoning it. From now on, my home is yours. Where you go, I go, even if it is to the ends of the earth. Ha, I'm so excited, she muttered that last part. Before the Slayer could think of a nonverbal reply, the last bit of information processed in his mind. His fingers twitched dangerously as his blood boiled with fury under his skin. It turns out that, by some unknown means, the Fortress of Doom and all of his possessions within it had been transported to this world 2,000 years ago. Perhaps there was a hardware malfunction, or maybe a few demons had somehow managed to escape the Repertorium before Davitha's death and wreaked havoc on the ship's controls. As if to spite him even further, said possessions had been granted law-defying abilities by means he didn't understand. Worse still, an entire war had been fought over his stuff, and now all of his prized possessions were scattered throughout the universe, held in the hands of pissy, greedy individuals who were using his own power to their benefit, malevolent intent or not. What AF way to start his societal rehabilitation? With practiced control and DSPLN, the rage settled to a simmer, and the Slayer let out a low grunt indicative of his discontent. It seemed that he had a new mission aside from cleansing the corruption from this world. For now though, he would put said mission aside. His possessions had been scattered about for over 2,000 years, and it wasn't like he was limited by time. He could take things slow. With a thought, the Praetor suit's HUD blipped a couple of times, setting a waypoint for the nearest city. Ironic as it was, the Slayer had been transported into this universe's underworld, synonymous with hell. The only difference was that this place wasn't evil incarnate. He wanted to see exactly how true that statement was. In other words, he wanted to see, in person, what the devils were like. The Slayer tapped Tiamat on the shoulder and motioned for her to follow. She nodded with a smile in response, and soon, they exited Tiamat's room, then the cave. Say, Mstr. Tiamat started as she followed behind a silent doomslayer, hands at her sides. Can you not speak? I would love to hear your voice, if not get to know you a little. After all, how could I be your familiar if I know nothing about you? I'm sure by now that your knowledge of me is, quite NTMT, she smiled coyly. The Slayer stopped walking for a second before continuing. He gave a light shrug, indicating that he could speak, he just preferred not to. I see. Well, if that's the case, perhaps you could send your thoughts to me via the familiar contract. He paused again as he gave the idea some consideration before he shook his head, another idea coming to mind. With a brief thought, pre-recorded dialogue began to play from the speakers in his helmet. The smooth, yet mechanical sound of Vega's voice began to recite the codex entries. Codex entry, UAC report file H8UM66S, Slayer's Testament it played. Mstr. Tiamat inquired in wide-eyed befuddlement at the voice. At the shake of the Doom Slayer's head, she understood that it was not actually him speaking. It disheartened her, but at the same time it delighted her. It showed that, despite the Slayer's seemingly mysterious nature, he trusted her enough to share information about himself. In the first age, in the first battle, when the shadows first lengthened, one stood. Vega's voice prattled on as Tiamat listened with rapt attention. It gave the Slayer a little bit of time to think for himself. Earlier, Tiamat had offered to teleport them both to the nearest city, but the Slayer had politely declined with a wave of his hand. With demons less and less on his mind, he could focus more on the environments around him. Back with the Sentinels, demons had always been his focus. Though he gave very fine attention to detail, even to the smallest and most trivial of things, the Slayer never had time to appreciate many things except for the things he cared about most, his possessions and his comrades. Now though, he could appreciate, perhaps even enjoy the art that nature provided. Thus, he wanted to see as much of this world as he could, even if such things took up time. Again, it was not like he was bound by mortal limitations. For him, time was unlimited. Once they arrive in Lilith, the capital city of the devils in the underworld, the Slayer planned on gathering more information about this world. As much of a helpful guide as Tiamat was, she wasn't omniscient. Information about the supernatural civilizations in general would be helpful, then possibly some information about the whereabouts of his stuff, the relics of doom they were supposedly called. Then, if he was feeling especially irritated, some information about the various criminal organizations that were undoubtedly surrounding this world. If there were shitheads causing trouble out there and nobody was doing jack about it, then he would. Call him a justice if you wanted, but he wouldn't sit around while innocents get harmed. It was one of the reasons he had joined the Marines so long ago. Now, would he rather stay in the underworld? Or should he find a place on Earth? These were the real questions he needed to ask. At some point during their trek, the Slayer had started doing maintenance on his weapons, a mechanical, yet passionate procedure of his that required utmost attention. A little bit after that, the codex entries finally ended, Tiamat looking about in dazed wonder. She quickly went over the new information in her head, recounting the tale of how the Doomslayer came to be and how Hell came to fear him, as well as how he came to be sovereignty among the Night Sentinels and their interdimensional empire. She knew the Doomslayer was an important figure, but this was groundbreaking. To think that there are so many worlds out there, so many civilizations her Mstr had already saved. There were so many, in fact, that she considered herself lucky to even have him standing here. What was it that had brought him to this world after Hell's sealing? She could only ponder. Either way, Tiamat's interest in the Slayer grew every minute. She was beginning to understand her MSTR better, able to empathize with him better. His backstory was heartbreaking, but at the same time it was badass. Hearing of his trials and tribulations, the things he had gone through to keep the innocent safe, to keep the multiverse balanced, it was indeed amazing. Her focus eventually fell to the current weapon in the Slayer's hands, one that he had just finished putting back together. "Ah! That must be one of your celestial armaments," she noted. "Amazing. I never thought I'd have the opportunity to see one in person." The Slayer paused his ministrations when he heard the words, celestial armaments. He turned his head and gave his draconic companion a flat look. She didn't seem to notice. "It is said that every one of the weapons in your arsenal is capable of destroying gods and even primordial beings. In recent years, I believe that humans have been modeling their weapons to look similar to yours, though they are nothing like yours. Yours radiates so much energy that it's almost blinding to look at." The Slayer grunted at that, looking down at the heavy cannon. His weapons were enhanced by his aura and argent energy. As long as they remained in his hands, they were capable of destroying anything. Now that I think about it, MSTR, are you aware of how strange your aura is? The Hellwalker thought about it, then made a SOSO gesture. "I see. Well, allow me to explain. Normally, we supernatural beings, and us dragons especially, are able to control the boundaries of our auras. Auras are like fields that represent how much energy or power we have. For example, my aura, or the field around me, is currently expanded throughout the forest, and my power is filling up that field, enough so that any creatures nearby would know not to walk in our path. If I were to retract my aura, I would be able to hide my power and presence from everything around me, unless one were to use an energy sensing technique." She waited for the Slayer to nod in understanding before she continued. "Your aura seems to work differently, and I'm not quite sure if this is correct, but based on what I have observed so far, I believe my theory is defendable. Your aura is very small, only covering your body. Your energy, however, usually when a being hides their presence, their energy is retracted, but still there, if only faint. When I look at you and sense your energy, it's like staring at the sun. It's so powerful, potent, and blinding. Even now, despite your aura being well contained, I can tell that your energy is limitless, feel that it demands respect and attention, and that shouldn't be possible, considering that I'm not even in your aura field." A brief concern came to mind as Tiamat explained. "Before I continue, I must warn you. Beings that can sense energy may cower or jump to fight you when they see you. Your energy is so blinding that it simply cannot be ignored, and some might register you as a threat." The Slayer nodded in acknowledgement before giving her a motion to finish her explanation. "Right, anyways, about the strangeness of your aura. It's quite dangerous, I must say. You see, your aura, while usually constricted to your form, will expand whenever you are angry." She frowned as the Slayer turned to her, an inquisitive look behind the visor. "I will not pry. I understand that what you've gone through is far beyond my imagination, and I'm sure that it was not pleasant. Your aura is proof of that. The few times that I've felt your aura expand so far, it was suffocating. I could feel your rage, and your overbearing presence demanded that I submit or be torn apart." She closed her eyes. "I'll admit, even I was a bit off-put by your anger, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one. When you first arrived here, your aura expanded to unimaginable lengths. It might have even encompassed the world." She looked up. "Hopefully not. Otherwise the supernatural world will be in a riot by the time we reach Lilith. The devils might even recognize that it was you who exuded the aura, and take it upon themselves to attack you out of fear." The Slayer only huffed in what she assumed to be exasperation before he shrugged, turning back to the invisible path. If anyone gave them SHT, he wouldn't hesitate to give them a proper beatdown. They walked for a few more hours, intermittently in silence and one-sided conversation, Tiamat recounting her adventures in the past, some of which the Slayer found to be actually interesting. They crossed many different terrain types, ranging from forests, to steppes, to rocky mountainous areas. It was odd that such different biome types were stuck so close together, but the Slayer didn't question it. In fact, he rather enjoyed such qualities of nature, him, a guy who took great pleasure in destroying things. It said a lot about the dichotomy in his personality. As they traveled, the Hellwalker noticed that his draconic companion kept rubbing at her head like she had a bad itch. He had a feeling that it wasn't the case and was in fact proven correct when she finally spoke up about it. Her eyes lowering, the Dragon King huddled closer to the Slayer's back. "Hey, MSTR," she started. The Slayer turned his gaze slightly, indicating his acknowledgement. She clicked her tongue. "I know it's childish, and I'm a Dragon King for heaven's sake. I should be above such things, but, could you pat my head again? Just this once." Silence. "And never mind, sorry for ask," she was cut off, her eyes widening as she felt a heavy gauntlet gently rub her scalp. She looked back at the Slayer, who continued to walk unabated in his stride. For one of the very few times in her life, Tiamat blushed. Tell nobody of this. Out of the 5 millennia and 4 centuries that she'd lived so far, this was the best day of Tiamat's life. With such trivial matters out of the way, the Doomslayer and his new familiar, Tiamat the Chaos Karma Dragon, continued their trek through the lands, the capital of Lilith little more than a day away. It was at the behest of Surzex Lucifer himself that ultimate-class devil and former Dragon King Tannan found himself scouring the lands for the source of the malevolent presence. The Blaze Meteor Dragon swept across the skies at a high altitude, cruising at a low speed to better identify the source of the supernatural world's distress. Indeed, at present, the entirety of the supernatural world was in an uproar. Borders had closed, alarms were sounded, and activity was at an all-time high. Wary factions anticipated attacks from others, holding their breaths in trepidation as hundreds of political calls were made between governments to demand answers or claim innocence, some casting blame on others, only further raising tensions between factions. In Devil Society, Surzex Lucifer had been flooded by social and political fear and outrage, and was currently busying himself with addressing the matter and appeasing the aristocracy. The usually cheerful and carefree Seraphol Leviathan had become the face of sobriety, the gravity of the situation not lost on her. Along with a large PR team, she had set herself to work, making contact with foreign nations and factions, exchanging information and confirmations in an attempt to both quell the steady fire that was building between races, and to find out more about the issue at hand. Falbium Asmodeus had opened his eyes and was spurred into action by a rude awakening, mobilizing the devil armies and putting up barriers around key cities, outposts, and locations. But why was all of this happening? What could have possibly happened that set the supernatural world off into a typhoon of distress? Truthfully, and rather disconcerting as well, nobody knew. Less than 24 hours ago, there had been an event. Suddenly, and without warning, everything went wrong. Tannan shivered as he remembered clearly. Something appeared, something devastatingly powerful, something filled to the brim with torment. Its aura encompassed the world, so frighteningly malicious that everything felt it. Rage, anger, loathing, killing intent defined it, nay, words couldn't express the violent wrath that it exuded. Any normal being would have been driven insane just by the feeling of their presence alone. The event set everything into a frenzy. Children and their parents were filled with fear as the aura forced them to their knees, soldiers went on high alert as their instincts told them to run, and factions were quick to jump the gun because nobody knew what the F happened. It had been so quick, so instantaneous, so everywhere that nobody could tell where it came from or what caused it. And that only scared people more. Tannan, recognizing the very possible threat to everything he held dear, and as an ultimate-class devil with a high position on the political ladder, took action immediately. As soon as the aura seemingly vanished, he had taken a place among the council of the 4 great Satans and followed Ajuka Beelzebub, who had been tasked with arguably the most important job of the four great Satans thus far, locating the epicenter and determining the cause of the event, the thing that was causing the universe-wide distress in the first place. After gathering information from multiple witness accounts and technology readings, Ajuka had managed to draw vectors using the given data, utilizing distance and aural magnitude recordings to cross all vector lines at one point on a map. Quite shockingly, though the cause of the event was still unknown, it was revealed that the epicenter of the malicious presence had been smack dab in the middle of the Chaos Karma Dragon's cave. One thing led to another, then Tannan volunteered to investigate. Thus, by the official order of Surzex, the Blaze Meteor Dragon had took to the skies in search of the presence. There were multiple reasons why Tannan volunteered to do this. For one, despite the strong but exterior, Tannan's caring and benevolent nature brewed worry within him for Tiamat's well-being, a comrade whose history was tied to his. Since Tiamat had yet to send a distress signal or summon an ally via Dragon Gate, it was no stretch to say that something had gone wrong. Worse, during the confusion of the initial event, Tiamat's signature had disappeared at some point, leaving both Tannan and Ajuka to scratch their heads in worry. The other reason for Tannan's insistence on this search was due in no small part to the familiarity of the malevolent aura. It was by no means familiar in a positive way, it was familiar in that he had felt that presence once long ago, though he couldn't remember where or when. What worried him most was that the aura was very reminiscent of the legendary relics of Doom, artifacts that he'd only caught a few glimpses of in his relatively long life. What was the aura's connection to the relics? Was it the creator? He had to know. The relics of Doom were very powerful, world-changing artifacts that only few had the honor to possess. Each one had the potential to tip the balance of power between factions, and yet nobody knew who had created them, not even the biblical God. For someone to have made such long-lasting artifacts, they had to be immensely powerful. Tannan, even if he was a dragon, dreaded the idea of making an enemy out of such a being. In locating the presence, Tannan hoped to make allies with them, whoever they may be. The Blaze Meteor Dragon's wings cut through the wind as he glided above the clouds, soon coming upon a mountain range, one that he had passed by many times before. Had he not been paying attention, he might have missed the glint of light reflecting off of some unseen surface below. His eyes were drawn down, and with his superior eyesight, he stared directly at the source. Tannan choked. This is. The moment he caught sight of the thing, his energy-sensing abilities were overwhelmed. His eyes wide, a bead of sweat rolled down the side of his snout as he stared at the sun. No, wait, not the sun. A quasar. Nay, wrong again. It was a being, but the amount of energy contained within their aura rivaled that of a quasar, exceeded it by magnitudes. It was blinding. Tannan's maw lay agape as he struggled to comprehend what he was seeing, a twinge of fear growing within him as the aura took up the entirety of his sensory capabilities, rendering him completely blind to all other auras in the area. His eyes began to burn, and he hurriedly looked away from the source. To his surprise, the foreboding aura seemed to disappear when he looked away from it. He couldn't even feel the indisputably overbearing energy signature. How could this be? The Dragon King peered down at the blinding aura again, then his blood grew cold as he deduced why he couldn't feel it. The aura was totally sealed around the being, almost like the perfect stealth mechanism, but the amount of energy it contained was so intense that it shined like AF quasar. Tannan had to make a conscious effort to stop himself from shaking at the implications of what he was seeing. He reiterated to himself, the being below him was in a state of constant, perfect stealth, and yet, the power that it was hiding from the world was so immense that it just bled through the aura. Such power was unthinkable. Incomprehensible. A terrifying question weighed on Tannan's mind. What if the being were to expand its aura? What would it be like to feel the pressure of countless stars on your shoulders? It was safe to say that Tannan had found the target. He had been expecting a powerful being. But this was terrifying. What a monster. The dragon bit down on his forked tongue as he weighed his options. On one hand, he needed to find out what had happened to Tiamat, and what the being's intentions were. On the other hand, if this being's intentions were truly malevolent, Tannan might not escape the engagement alive. The sound of beating wings heavily persisted as Tannan pondered what to do. After a near minute of indecisiveness, Tannan noticed that the longer he stared at the aura, the less blinding and intense it got, eventually settling down to an intense light in the distance. The dragon made a conjecture: the amount of energy was so intense that it flooded the senses, but given enough time to get used to it, the light died down as energy sensing abilities accommodated for the overload. It made the aura seem much less threatening, but Tannan knew it wasn't the case. With that tidbit of information, there was only another moment of hesitation before Tannan made the least sensible decision of his life, the mental equivalent of F it, and slowly started his descent, a magic circle spinning by his ear as he made to contact Ajuka. It was only after he got closer when he realized that the being was surrounded by hundreds of other energy signatures. The Slayer was annoyed. Only a few hours earlier, he'd stood atop one of the mountains that overlooked the vast moonlit lands of the underworld. He could see a desert, a forest, more mountains, and even a sprawling city at the edge of the horizon, Lilith, he presumed. Somehow, despite her insistence that she was fine, in the single minute that he had taken to stop and survey the lands, Tiamat had managed to lay her head on the shoulder of his armor and close her eyes, taking extreme comfort in his presence. She went out like a light. It turned out that the day the Slayer and his new companion had left for Lilith had coincidentally been the day that Tiamat was to nap for the first time in a month. Now, this in and of itself wasn't much of a problem. The Slayer could carry her around without the slightest encumbrance. In fact, Tiamat subconsciously clung onto his back, making it easier on him, so why not let her rest? There was one major issue with this. Tiamat seemed to subconsciously retract her aura whenever she slept, engaging in an impromptu stealth mode. In other words, there was no longer an active aura to keep all of the creatures away, both big and small. Most of the lesser beasts of these lands took one look at the Slayer and booked it to next Tuesday, but the larger ones sought to test him. It didn't take long for the Slayer to notice that he and his companion were being tailed by a group of angry beasts that were steadily growing in number. He ignored them at first, but during his trek down the mountain, when it became increasingly clear that the beasts wouldn't stop following them, even after they'd left territorial boundaries, and once he concluded that Tiamat wouldn't be waking up any time soon, the Slayer, after having walked for 6 hours with the beasts following him, decided to sit and wait. To see who would grow the ball to face him first. So, here he was, sat on a boulder in the middle of a flat plateau with a lightly snoring dragon woman hugging tightly around the praetor suit, clinging like a cat to his back, reducing him to what was essentially a defunct babysitter in green power armor. Great. Truthfully, he had only been slightly annoyed by this whole situation, but over time, his irritation grew when the beasts did nothing. It seemed that the assholes that had followed him were too much of cowards to act. Soon, the moonlight became daylight as the sun began to rise over the edge of the horizon, but still, all was quiet. As the Slayer waited for something to make a move, his patience wearing thin, he busied himself, sorting through Tiamat's memories, mentally cataloging each beast he identified into the codex. He gazed up at the walls of rock that grew higher with the mountain, his eyes sweeping over minotaurs, corrosive slimes, chimeras, and, strangely enough, European dryads. Normally none of these creatures would be caught dead together. Minotaurs and chimeras fought each other relentlessly, slimes ate everything they touched, and dryads were peaceful spirits of pure intent. But here they ignored one another, peeking at the Slayer from the tops of rocky cliffs, eyeing him with anger, frothing at the mouths but refusing to face him, their fear overpowering all else. He simply waited either for one of the beasts to take action, or for Tiamat to wake up so they could leave. The Slayer never instigated. Never had. His actions had always been in response to something unjust, or something that pissed him off to a great degree. Perhaps he had unintentionally set something in motion in the past, maybe provoked a few shitheads into action, but he had never done so without reason. He wanted it to stay that way. After nearly 2 hours of silence broken only by the metallic sound of the Slayer sharpening the doomblade, a total of 8 hours that he'd been followed and watched, just when he was about to get up and leave, one of the beasts finally grew a pair, leaping down from the cliffs above. It landed a few dozen meters away, a heavy thud bouncing off the stone walls of the mountainous expanse. The Slayer raised his head as the Minotaur growled viciously, pointing its axe at him challengingly. Eventually, the Minotaur's horned brothers joined it, taunting the Slayer from across the plateau. The Slayer's annoyance hit a threshold, and the ever-simmering anger within his veins began to rise. The Praetor's suit blipped as it recognized the hostility, and a prelude began to play, a Slayer city thundering in the Slayer's helmet. Finally, each one of the beasts was roughly the size of a baron of hell and had brown fur, thick chests and arms, sharp fangs, horns, and large axes, but how strong were they comparatively? As the Minotaurs interspersed themselves along the rocky plateau, between boulders and hoodoos, the Hellwalker itched to find out. Enough was enough. The Slayer turned his head to the still snoring Tiamat before slowly looking back at the feral beasts. They roared and yipped intensely. In response, he retracted the doomblade and crushed the sharpening rock he'd found, leaping down from his spot on the boulder. With little thought, he shrugged Tiamat off and placed her on the safer side of the boulder. She didn't stir. Satisfied, the Slayer turned to the beasts, rolling his shoulders as he studied the plateau one more time, memorizing the arena in less than a second. His fists clenched in preparation, and he directed a chilling gaze at his new adversaries, giving them one final chance to leave before the slaughter began. They didn't. In the first instant, as the first Minotaur took a step, giant axe in hand, the Slayer's helmet lowered darkly. Within the Praetor's suit, Meathook blared. There was a flash, a billionth of a fraction of a blink of an eye passed, and before the first Minotaur even took its second step, its head was blown off by the precision bolt. The kill happened so quickly that none of the other beasts even saw what happened. They wouldn't have either way, because the frontmost group of Minotaurs had been frozen solid by the ice bomb just milliseconds before the precision bolt even shot. Consequently, the explosion produced by the precision bolt headshot tore the frozen Minotaurs apart, the shockwave causing those who weren't frozen to stumble. Before the faltered Minotaurs could recover, a frag grenade landed at their hooves. When the grenade went off a moment later, the area was awash with BLD, fire, and shredded body parts. One Minotaur that just barely managed to survive had its legs torn off, and as it writhed on the ground in agony, it looked up just in time to see the Slayer appear before it. Then the world spun as its head came clean off, the doomblade cleaving through its neck. In the single second that it took for the Slayer to end nearly half of the bull-headed beasts, he had already analyzed and determined all of their habits, tactics, and weaknesses. And by Daisy, they were weak. It felt like curb stomping a pack of imps to dust. For some reason, that only pissed the Slayer off more. When the headless Minotaur's body touched the ground, the Slayer landed in a slight crouch, the rage beginning to build. As he straightened and raised his head, his fists clenched at his sides. Like a tidal wave that rose above even the tallest skyscrapers, his aura began to unleash, his eyes emitting a soft glow behind his helmet. And when the remaining Minotaurs saw him, saw the physical manifestation of the concept of doom itself, it was only then that they realized. They'd F up. In an instant, the Slayer vanished, such was his speed, firing and swapping between weapons in rapid succession as he crossed the battlefield with horrifying precision. In moments, the sheer destructiveness of his power made it as if every possible natural disaster had suddenly occurred at once. The mountains shook as the environment was torn asunder, cracking as deafening explosions turned rock to dust and flesh to mist, massive fissures traveling up the sides of cliffs, causing large landmasses to shatter and tumble down the mountain in large landslides every time the Slayer struck, reshaping the earth. Fear and confusion filled the Minotaurs and the creatures above. All of the mythical creatures of the mountain felt his wrath, shaking and hiding as the world quaked, tripping and falling atop the shifting lands. The Slayer remained merciless. A Minotaur frantically swung its truck-sized axe at him, but he stepped into its guard and sliced off both of its legs in one fluid motion, then punched it in the torso, the impact causing its upper half to explode in a gory mess, the force tearing up the rock beneath their feet in a wave. Milliseconds after, as the gore expanded outwards, the Slayer fired the ballista upwards through the bloody mist, vaporizing some, and the twin beams of argent eviscerated a minotaur that had jumped in an attempt to land an overhead strike. The plasma only stopped when it struck the underside of a cliff, causing a large energetic explosion that blew off large chunks of rock, causing the whole cliff to collapse in a cloud of dust. A minotaur that had been behind the Slayer had been bringing its axe down on the Hellwalker with a roar, but the spray of BLD from the first got into its eyes, and it fumbled on the way down, not that it would have been any trouble for the Slayer in the first place. The Hellwalker merely raised a gauntlet and caught the blade, and as the Minotaur staggered, the Slayer kicked the beast in its chest and ripped the weapon from its hands. Before it could recover, the Slayer brought the axe down upon the Minotaur's head with such strength that when the axe easily cleaved the Minotaur in half and hit the ground, the sheer power of the strike parted the earth itself, generating massive cracks that traveled along the ground at high speed, creating a divide, a canyon in the plateau several dozens of meters deep. It was as if tectonic plates suddenly shifted and grew apart. The shock waves were so immense that the massive cliffs and mountain peaks that surrounded the battlefield seemed to shake and wobble uncontrollably, chunks of rock breaking off the tops, others toppling over and off the mountain. All of the creatures staggered from the quaking, some falling over, but the Slayer never stopped. As he discarded what remained of the axe, now a broken stick, he dashed at the nearest Minotaur, jumping to one side of the splitting canyon that he'd just created. The beast managed to recover from the earthquake, and with fear in its movements, it swung horizontally at him. It missed when the Slayer dashed away, then every nerve in its body was set alight with agony as the meat hook speared through its back and out its chest, setting it aflame with energy-sapping flames. Before it could turn around, the super shotgun boomed, turning it into a cloud of gore just as the meat hook retracted from its body, flinging the Slayer towards the next Minotaur. Said Minotaur could only open its mouth in terror before the Slayer crashed into it, palming its face with a grip that crushed bone before he slammed it headfirst into the ground. The impact obliterated the Minotaur instantly, generating an explosion of force that excavated a large radius of rock from the ground in an eruption of debris, leaving nothing but a large, building-sized hole in the ground that started where the remains of the Minotaur's mutilated body ended, and ended at the edge of the battlefield-splitting canyon. As the Slayer rose from the ground at the edge of the smoking crater, he grasped the lip of the hole and tore a chunk of rock out, gripping for the mere sake of having something to grip. It crumpled to dust in his gauntlet, then he released it, and before the majority of it touched the ground, he had already disemboweled a dozen more Minotaurs, turning them and the ground beneath them to paste with his fists. In a short-lived miracle, one Minotaur, which had watched its kin become craters in the ground, managed to block a precision bolt shot that turned its axe and one of its horns to splinters, only for its kneecap to liquefy under the pressure of the combat shotgun. As it howled in pain and fell forward, the Slayer grabbed it by its remaining horn, held its face up to the equipment launcher, and unleashed the flame belch on its visage. It struggled in agony before it slumped in the Slayer's grasp, and he crushed the remains of its horn in his grip before dropping it with a thud and surveying the battlefield. The plateau was no longer recognizable as a singular entity, and neither was the mountain. Cliffs and high peaks had fallen, leveling out the terrain some, large clouds of debris billowed up everywhere, obscuring certain portions of the landscape from view, and large, cavernous cracks and newly created valleys ran up the mountain and along the plateau, breaking the latter up into multiple different landmasses that all differed in elevation by a meter each due to shifts in tectonic plates caused by the Slayer's strikes. At the base of the mountain itself, the fissures and cracks in the earth derived from the Slayer's strength that were carried down the plateau ended about a kilometer into the large forests, many trees of which had toppled over. Collectively, all this damage was as if multiple earthquakes, meteor strikes, hurricanes, and floods had all happened at once, tearing the lands asunder. In fact, the sheer amount of dust and debris in the air caused by the shattering of rock made the air of the entire mountain hazy and smoky. Rays of sunshine could be seen filtering in individually, emphasized by the larger pockets of dust particles. It was nothing the Slayer hadn't seen before. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Sir Yeetus Deletus on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.